Good evening from New York. It is the great shell game after fighting every single job creation measure proposed by Democrats in Congress and the White House, killing some, watering down others. The House Republican leader today used the very last monthly jobs report we'll get before the election to slam President Obama for failing to create jobs. Our fifth story, job creation that Republicans fought every step of the way for political gain, over which they stand to gain politically, both for their opposition and for the results of it. Millions of Americans out of work, struggling to survive. Both the president and House Republican leader Boehner spoke about today's jobs reports, painting drastically different pictures. The congressman said private sector hiring is flat, and of course he blamed the administration.
This morning we got the latest national jobs report from the Department of Labor. It looks a lot like the reports we've seen every month since President Obama signed the stimulus spending bill into law. Unemployment is high. Millions of Americans are out of work. Private sector job creation remains flat. That's what you got for your $787 billion worth of spending. High unemployment, a bigger government, and an economy struggling to create jobs. The upcoming election is a referendum. As Americans, we have to decide, do we want another 2 years of job-killing policies coming out of Washington, or have we had enough?
He's reading a teleprompter, by the way. President Obama, however, claimed the private sector actually gained jobs.
This morning, we learned that in the month of September, our economy gained 64,000 jobs in the private sector. In July and August, private sector job numbers were revised upwards. So we've now seen 9 straight months of private sector job growth. In all, more than 850,000 private sector jobs gained this year, which is in sharp contrast to the almost 800,000 jobs that we were losing when I first took office.
Who's telling the truth? The Labor Department said the country lost 95,000 jobs in total, so how could the president claim the private sector added jobs? Unlike Mr. Boehner, the president explained where the jobs are disappearing from. Hint, what's the role of big government in jobs news?
That news is tempered by a net job loss in September, which was fueled in large measure by the end of temporary census jobs and by layoffs in state and local governments. I should point out that these continuing layoffs by state and local governments of teachers and police officers and firefighters and the like would have been even worse without the federal help that we've provided to states over the last 20 months. Help that the Republicans in Congress have consistently opposed. I think the Republican position doesn't make much sense, especially since the weakness in public sector employment is a drag on the private sector as well.
That's right. Government got so much smaller, it offset private sector growth. This is public job change for the last 2 years. Here is the private sector. And how does the private sector add jobs in a recession? Government spending on infrastructure, for one thing.
I believe that instead of sitting still, we should invest in rebuilding America's roads and railways and runways. Too many American workers have been out of work for months, even years. And that doesn't do anybody any good when there's so much of America to rebuild. Our infrastructure is falling far behind what the rest of the world is doing, and upgrading it is vital to our economy and our future competitiveness.
So what did Republican New Jersey Governor Chris Christie announce today? That he will now think about not canceling America's biggest transportation project. A tunnel, hundreds of millions of dollars already spent, doubling rail capacity into New York, already underway. The jobs of the builders hanging on it, to say nothing of money New Jersey might have to repay to the federal government, all of it hanging on Christie's decision. Let's turn first to MSNBC contributor Ezra Klein, also staff writer at The Washington Post and a columnist for Newsweek magazine. Ezra, good evening.
Good evening, Keith.
You referred to the effect President Obama referenced there as the anti-stimulus. Can you explain that to Mr. Boehner if he's watching, what he's missing?
Absolutely. So in 2009, we passed a stimulus bill, a $787 billion bill. And contrary to what Mr. Boehner said, at that point you see job losses begin to reverse. We're down at about 800,000, losing every month, and then it slowly modulates until we go up to positive job numbers in the early and mid part of 2010. But of course, the stimulus is ending now. We didn't do it for more than 2 years. years, and state and local governments are essentially collapsing. Their revenues are collapsing, and so they are now contracting. They're firing people, and just as when a business fires people, it adds people to the unemployment rolls. When a government fires people, it adds people to the unemployment rolls. And this, by the way, and it's important, is bad for business. The businesses will not invest until they think jobs are coming back and people can buy their stuff. And if jobs are not coming back because state governments are firing everybody, businesses won't really be able to hire either.
So with that, Republicans keep hammering what sounds like an intuitive argument. You can't borrow and spend your way out of a recession. We've heard this now for 2 years, ever since their recession started. Might be true at home over the kitchen table. Why is it not for a federal government?
Yeah, it simply doesn't work that way. So imagine an economy, right? You have three people who can spend. One is consumers, one is businesses, and one is the government. You have a massive financial crisis where consumers and businesses are taken out of the game. If the government steps back too, there is nobody to buy anything. If there's nobody to buy anything, businesses can't employ anyone. That means that no money goes to consumers, and neither businesses or consumers can get back into spending. Government needs to step in, not forever, but until the other two can get back on their feet. And right now, government did a good job of that right at the beginning, but because of Republican obstruction has taken itself out of the game for now, and we are seeing the consequences. We have, as Obama said, had 9 months of private sector growth, but it has been offset by public sector contraction. The government, the small government policy we're running here is essentially destroying the recovery.
And numbers, predictions for the state and local numbers for next year are worse. Mr. Obama's prospects for overcoming Republican opposition to another stimulus plan, obviously worse, no matter how the midterms turn out. Does America get any jobs back between now and 2012?
Hopefully some will come back. But look, this is a real dangerous chance of becoming self-perpetuating. If you don't move, if we continue having a sort of weakness in the market or the foreclosure crisis makes things worse, you'll have a situation where people are out of jobs for long enough that it becomes hard to re-employ them. Their skills deteriorate. It's what economists call hysteresis, and it may be what we're moving into. We're in a real dangerous place right now for government to walk out of the game. People remember the Great Depression ended after World War II. We don't need to have a world war, but we do need Congress to not decide it's time to give up on the American economy.
And to that point, the debate in New Jersey about bailing out on this doubling of the rail capacity into New York City and the jobs that it would create in the short term and the jobs and infrastructure it would create in the long term. Can you explain that briefly to Governor Christie, who doesn't seem to get it?
It's horrifying, Keith. So infrastructure is the best deal in the economy right now. If you want to see where we've lost jobs, of course, it's construction because the housing sector collapsed. Raw materials are incredibly cheap. Concrete, steel, wood, it's all very, very cheap. And it's cheap for the government to borrow. So right now, the best thing we can do is invest in infrastructure. We will never have this good a deal again. And of course, we will need to rebuild our infrastructure in the future. So we've got a great deal here in the economy. We can employ exactly the people we need to employ. And Christie is stepping out of it. It's a terrible business decision for the government.
MSNBC contributor Ezra Klein, also of Newsweek and The Washington Post. As always, thanks for your time. Have a good weekend.
Thank you.